This computer, we should be on. Hi, good morning, Four Arrows.
Good morning, Michael. How are
Yeah,
things in Canada?
it's good. You know, it's a little snowy and cold, I guess, a little bit more than where you are in Oregon.
Right, and my daughter's down in LA and with a lot of fires coming up her door, so it's kind of
Okay.
hard to imagine in November. Yeah.
Well, this is about doing our first Fear Talk, my first Fear Talk in an official way. And I'm just going to introduce very briefly, and then I'm going to ask you to just do a little intro for us in the way that you would like to. So Fear Talk to me was something that has come for a long time. As you know, I've been researching this topic for a long time. You and I go back quite a ways, and I'm going to put stuff on below this video so people can link and find out more about our bio, so we don't need to take up time going through that. The Fear Talk idea really came, which I was sort of thinking, and I'm pretty sure you agree more or less, that it's hard to have a good, deep, sensitive, emergent conversation on the topic of fear in, quote, this kind of contemporary times. Let's talk just even the North American context. So that was just something that's always been eating away. Why is that so difficult? And then I think, well, you know, it's hard to have a good sex talk in a slow, process way as an inquiry. And there's easy to set up opinions, easy to set up positionings. Oh, well, this is what fear is about, and this is this, and just like this is what sex is about, this is this. Or in general, I'm suggesting that maybe that we're all sort of trapped a little bit, including myself as a researcher on fear, trapped a little bit in this long cultural history of a bit of a taboo formation around talking about fear itself. And so as an educator and a curriculum person, yourself as an educator and curriculum person, I think we have an opportunity to actually say, well, why don't we try a methodology called FearTalks, where we drop into exploring and inquiring what that might be. And we can use these demonstration videos to use for other people to maybe set up the way they'd like to do a Fear Talk. So it's not just about gaining information, right, that you and I might provide today. It's about them getting to actually watch somebody, watch a couple people do it, and how might they do it. And I think that's getting models, right? I'm after models. So this Fear Talk series of a few people that I will start exploring this with, you're the first one, is really to model how to actually talk about a difficult subject, perhaps, let's say, even though in some ways fear seems like a very simple topic. All right, that's my...
I like that. I like it. We're going to have a courageous conversation about fear and courage.
Yeah, and
as you know, Michael, in the traditional ways of most indigenous cultures, an important conversation like this invites in the sort of the mysterious, invisible world of energies, spirits, or whatever you want to call them. So, would it be okay if I say a brief prayer and share a song with your audience? And it might be also a good model for how to enter into conversations that require courage. So I'm just going to, just speak to the manifestations of the great mysterious thing to say that we hope this conversation will help bring a balance into the world. And the song I'm going to play is the Cherokee Lullaby that the mothers sang to their children to tell them, in spite of how bad things are, see the beauty all around. Tukashila wakantanka nama kompa natatewa topa mushimaka hituayan kelo. Oyate oyasin unchi wichalapona oichakyapo. Hechawitsozani washte unyawat big delo. Oyate oyasin chanko luta ochnamani. Ihailako wichwanki tunkashila kiksuye. Metako yasin. Osio. Well, I really love how you set this up, Michael. I think the reason it's so difficult for people to have conversations like this, and a lot about sex, or the intimate parts of the body, or whatever it is that has to do with the foundation of nature, of which all of these things really apply. Because I think in their dominant worldview, and in most of the cultures under it, there is a fear of nature. I think, most people are afraid to be out in the forest at night. There's something about the history going all the way back to the Greeks, where Socrates says, I can't learn out amongst the trees, only in towns with men. There's something of some fear that we have created that sees nature as either dead or inert or dangerous or evil, or at least something to avoid. And I can't help but think, and I haven't thought about this before until I was listening to your words. I can't help but think that part of our reluctance to be able to talk about these deep, fundamental, natural impulses, we could call them, such as fear, somehow relate to our fear of nature and how we've tried to control it. And so the best way to control fear is to keep it away from us and to not talk about it. Well, that's just what came to me. What do you think about that?
Good start. I was thinking about Luke Barnesmore, who is a student of yours as well. And, I've just been reading one of his papers he sent me, and we're working on a topic, and he calls it the fear of eternity. And what he's after this notion of time, and how time has been constructed in the dominant worldview. The worldview you're talking about that has taught this fear of nature. But he sort of is trying to, in typical of a geographer and a philosopher, he's kind of going to even a deeper level of time itself in our relationship to the cosmos and time. And once we got out of living time, we got out of cyclical time. He says we moved into this linear time, and that we're supposed to kind of go from here and get good.
He's a brilliant thinker. He really is a brilliant thinker. And I think Einstein really kind of told us that, and quantum physics tells us that, right? What was Einstein's quote? Time is an illusion, albeit a stubborn one. And so I do think, I just recently wrote an email sending out the 2 Native American women that just won in the political world in New Mexico and Kansas. And on my subject line, I wrote one step at a time in a world where time is an illusion.
Nice.
And I kind of, I did, and that just was spontaneous. I didn't know what to put in the subject, and I just sent that out to my faculty. And I think Luke is touching on that. So thank you for sharing that.
So we started with the mystery, right? Your invocation in the Indigenous way, with the music, with beauty, with your own words from the Lakota language, or I think you used, if I understood. And this notion of embracing, all right, we're connecting and embracing with beauty, seems like something that's really important to guide as some kind of framework when we are trying to so-called manage fear, trying to understand and inquire into fear, right? And fear management and transformation of fear and so on. All these good things. So I think today I'm just sort of playing with this as we go. There's something about a construction of a holding, a matrix holding, and it's a more feminine approach, or lunar approach, to use Howard Cheek's language. So we seem to be doing that container thing before we just dive into, well, this is what fear is, and this is how I define it, and this is how we cope with it better and be successful and all these things. I think you can see that we're walking on a different territory here. We're walking in a different foot pacing, in a different moccasin, so to speak.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you, and I think that this holding of this container maybe is something that all the conversations should do, as opposed to getting into the linear definitions and things. Because, as you say, this matrilineal loss in our world, and the positiveness of how many women have gotten elected in this recent election, going back to it, I think that's crucial to the song that I just played. I mean, imagine mothers where every single day their relatives are freezing to death, or getting beaten, or starving on this march that killed 25% of my people. And imagine a mother being able to sit down, and the words go something like this: I know this is tough, my little child, but did you see the beautiful clouds? Did you see the grasses in the fields blowing in the wind as if they were dancing? What was another kind of phrase in the song? Did you hear the brook that we walked by today? If you can see beauty all around, and of course the novel have their pollen path prayer about beauty before me, behind me, above me, and below me. If you can hold on to that, maybe that's a reason why my research has shown that our indigenous ways of being that led us for 99% of human history put courage and then fearlessness, these two concepts you and I have talked about and you've written about. Maybe that's why it's so important, because it has this relationship that you're talking about with the feminine principle of nurturing and with seeing the beauty. So I think we're on to something. I hope you're recording this.
I am. I hope we're recording it. We are. I think we're talking in also the domain of aesthetics. If we could just even frame it for maybe people who think in those terms. So
your artwork, your wife's artwork, to me, yeah, I mean, and we don't even have a word for art as I know it in Lakota or in Chalagi, and so because art is like it's like just so much a part of life, right? So yeah, I don't know how you tie that in specifically to fear, though. How do you do that?
Well, it'd be interesting to start in a way we're sort of playing here with is we're actually talking about an aesthetics of fear to fearlessness, which is interesting because it just sort of shifts that paradigm of psychology of fear.
Talk to me more about that. How would
so if
I want to get into a definition, what would be an aesthetic of fear?
An aesthetic of fear would be, and this really comes out of Luke's work too. He says, when we have a fear of the eternal, which is this time that is this sort of beautiful grandeur of the mystery, right? And that openness to the greater other, and that we are not separate from that greater other. We may be distinct.
Is that the same as a fear of death?
No, I think it's much deeper. He even says fear of death is only a symptom of the fear of eternity. And I think this is a really wonderful ontological, right? A very deep notion of understanding of being, which is really a cosmology, a worldview revisioning.
Well, it's our medicine wheel that's so popular in the Plains Indian tribes. The medicine wheel is all about that revolving cycle that comes back to the center, and that is eternal. And so,
that is an aesthetics of fearlessness itself.
Wow.
An aesthetics of fear would be the marking out of a much more linear path going from bad to good in a kind of moralistic sense, rather than a path and many paths in the medicine wheel, which are multiple, plural, located in land and in culture, but also cosmic at the same time. All of that overlapping in this kind of aesthetic resonance of participation, consciousness.
Well, would that then be what you and I, what you wrote about in Fearless Engagement? Wouldn't that be how I kind of think of as fearlessness, in that, the courage is not in the aesthetic, maybe. I'm not thinking of this for the first time now, based on what you're saying.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at courage as the aesthetic, maybe the aesthetic doesn't come until you trust the universe, which includes the infinite. And in that infinite trust is when fearlessness is born. And I don't know if your listeners are, know that you're one of the few people, and I think Gandhi in Western thinking about this, who has ever endorsed fearlessness. Almost everybody else, starting with Socrates, thought fearlessness was complete foolishness.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I think I'm loving the connection there.
Yeah, I think in some sense, it's like if we're going to deal with this fear problem, which you and I and many people are talking about, I think we really have to think of many multiple ways into it. And one of the things I like about even the aesthetics of the medicine wheel, as you described it, is it's an aesthetic of all. It's aesthetics of eternity itself. And so there's no fear of being and not being. And this is what Luke is pointing out. That's the dualism, right? That creeps in when we separate being is over here and then there's not being after we die, and what is that? And so the fear of this uncertainty is fundamental, seemingly, to our ability to reason itself. I'll just repeat that.
That's powerful.
Our fear of uncertainty is actually a product of reason, which has the ability to look at multiple perspectives and therefore doubt any particular one of them may be exactly the right answer. So reason itself, I think, is actually very powerful, but we are using it often in this very reductive form of fearing, that we have to get the right answer. We have to be good. We have to correct and be able to go to heaven, be popular, get voted in, win friends, self-esteem. Back to the medicine wheel, to me, as an aesthetic of fearlessness is just a notion I think is popping up today.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that the medicine wheel has entered into our conversation, because that's exactly what it does. It's symbolically a nonlinear model, isn't it, for human development? And so if and with the directions and the in between directions, it's often about this sense of trust and this capacity to remain in the present moment, and the gifts of music and art. It's a remarkable model for talking about fear.
And to use your model of cat fawn, which we don't necessarily have to describe here, we'll make links to it. It seems that something like that aesthetic, and there could be many. So if it's the form of the medicine wheel, if it's the aesthetic of you playing that flute to introduce a conversation of meaning and depth and sacredness, what we're doing is invoking a kind of co-participatory inquiry and a kind of open playfulness. It's fun too, but it's also serious. And I see that medicine wheel is basically saying, bring anything into this. Bring your troubles. Bring your fear. Bring your hurts. Bring your woundedness, from history, not just you as an individual, because this is a cosmic aesthetic. It's a cosmic holding space for humans in my form to move into, right, and explore that path, but connect with all possibilities, because the medicine wheel is 360 vertical and horizontal dimensions.
You made me think of something about the cat fawn I had never thought of until just this moment, if you can believe that, after all the...
Love it. 30 years you've been working on the model.
Exactly. And, for those who don't know, CAT stands for sort of the trance-based learning, with the words concentration, activated transformation, and that you transform positively or negatively depending on which worldview you hold fear, authority, words, and nature under, right? But I just thought now, I was thinking, well, wait a minute. Authority, words, and nature don't necessarily have a negative connotation, right? Especially not nature. And, and why do I have, usually I like to make lists that all have sort of something in common, so and that are consistent with whether they're positive or negative. So why do I have fear right there with nature? And of course, in the dominant culture, it would make sense that both are negative, right? and both words and authority are used negatively. But I never thought about that. And I'm thinking now that really this idea of the medicine wheel and its beauty is built into all four of those things. That's the first time I've thought about that. So thank you.
Nice. Yeah, so cat fawn to me is kind of a tool, a method, right? A tool, a mnemonic theory that in some way reflects the kind of nature of the medicine wheel itself, is that you can kind of walk these paths, right? You can in a concentrated state, because when you walk in and you greet the medicine wheel and you begin that process, or whether you greet a tree in nature, you're now entering this more concentrated, activated attention, this concentration state, an altered consciousness for the purpose of learning.
And that's where your aesthetics comes in. There was just an article yesterday in the New York Times all about the placebo. And the author of it was saying, the research is showing that it's not a trick. It's really something that's about imagination. And when Ben Franklin went over to Paris, when Mesmer was first doing hypnosis, he turned it down and put it down because he said, no, the patient is healing because they're imagining it, because they had blindfolded them with the first double-blind study, as if imagination was something to forget about, right? But if our imaginations and our concentration in an alternative consciousness can be transforming, why are we not putting so much more attention into the aesthetics, which is about imagining, right? Yeah.
Barbara and I call that the irrational domain, right? It's not the rational per se. It's not the irrational, which is the opposite that gets set up in the Western Enlightenment complex, right? Which is sort of fear of being irrational. No, it's irrational. It's moving beautifully in between. And that's the aesthetic. I think that's the aesthetic positioning. And that's where the aesthetics of fear could actually offer us new theories of fear and fear management and fearlessness, and offer us new practices, which again, cat fawn, I think, is one of the exploratory practices. I mean, if you think of cat fawn itself, right, the history and the metaphors of this cat and a fawn, what is that starting to set up? And this came to you in a more dream, irrational dimension, right? In a transmission, in a sense.
So based on real animals and a real death experience.
A real environment, near-death experience was part of that. So there was all these new juxtapositions outside of consensual reality.
Can you go back to elaborating a little bit on something you said about the phrase fear of irrationality, I think it was?
Yeah, I think when the rational became so dominating in a dominant worldview, we twisted reason, we twisted logic through that worldview into being that which will control and contain all the other, right? And be able to sort it and categorize it and manipulate it.
Do you think that is there? And I'm probably on slippery slope here, but do you think that had anything to do with an anti-feminine perspective? Because sometimes the logic of the feminine is not quite as rational as as the masculine roles would have it. But do you think that the anti-womanism that has existed in this dominant culture compared to our indigenous cultures somehow was about the fear of the irrational? I've never thought of that before.
Oh, absolutely. And then really what gets conflated is the irrational, which is where Barbara and I talked about. That's the woundedness. That's our wounded selfness and how it expresses trying to get healing. And it acts out. It does all kinds of things. It's loaded with fear and terror and post-traumatic effects.
And violence.
And hypnotic effects that come out often as violence. But the irrational is actually quite unique. It's a distinct domain, and that's what the rational didn't see in women, or didn't want to see, is that they have a whole irrational domain, which is this sense of birthing bodies. They are the creator manifest.
So then what's going on today in a Trumpian world and all over the world. I mean, it's in Honduras, it's in the Philippines. Now it's going to maybe be in Brazil. It's all over. What is it that we're saying that can be useful to seeing fear, as a catalyst for practicing a virtue, of understanding and dialoguing about it? Are we suggesting that people start talking more in aesthetic ways about it, and looking at it in terms of the material? I mean, I think we're bringing up so many ways for other people to start talking about this.
This is interesting, right? Because that's what just part of, I said, what if we actually label something called FearTalks? We need to have FearTalks.
I would love for people to talk about all of these topics and then tune into it. So I hope they do.
Yeah, to correct, have this dialogue in schools with children and say, okay, it's time to do FearTalks. We design this into curriculum, in a spiral curriculum throughout the K to post-secondary.
Can't think of anything more important.
It's a total practice of one of the more powerful forces that you and I both agree is, and many say, fear is uniquely very powerful. Even to call it an emotion is actually quite a euphemism.
Exactly.
And that's what I find in Luke Barnsworth when he says, when you look at our fundamental relationship in the dominant worldview, this one that's been around 10,000+ years, perhaps, we start off with already a fear of the cosmos, a fear of eternity, because we can't control it.
I think it could be educationally one of the great counter-hegemonic strategies, for counter-hegemonic democracy.
Includes an indigenizing into that, includes a fearlessness paradigm, which I'm bringing forward, and I think your work is bringing forward many other ways that are informing that a different paradigm, right?
Well, we've talked about the sensitivities just earlier relative to using the word indigenizing education.
Yeah.
And whether it comes from non-Indian people that think it's bad because rightly they don't know enough about it to do it, or they think it's bad because it's useless and it's a good thing we've escaped the primitive past. But those are the two camps on the
non-Indigenous
side. But on the Indian side, you got two sides. You've got the side that says, we've had everything else stolen from us. Now you're trying to put into this academy, which is all about colonizing. You're trying to say that it can give you the wisdom of indigenous cultures. We don't need our language anymore. Baloney on that, which is totally understandable. But then you've also got the other side, which is a position that I take, and that is there aren't enough indigenous people anymore who know these worldviews. Because, I can tell you a growing and large number, and maybe the majority, I don't know nobody's ever done statistics on it, of indigenous people, even people who speak their language, have suffered through so much oppression and so much propaganda and so much missionary work that they themselves now are, not knowing anymore, not remembering anymore these traditional ways, right? So there's not enough of us on a sinking boat. If one looks at the number of species that are going extinct every day and the climate change, we're all indigenous to this planet. So somehow we've got to get to a place where we say, look, if you're going to indigenize education, do everything you can to find local people who are still practicing their original ways, everything possible. But in the absence of that, and that opportunity, which is going to be relatively infrequent for the numbers of people that need to be understood, then let's look at those generalizations or the pan-Indian common denominators without fear that those are common denominators that we can study. And when it comes to local knowledge, we just have to re-indigenize ourselves if there's no longer any people in that city or town because we've wiped them out or they've all lost it, So I think on both sides of it, there's a fear of engaging. And we've got to have the courage to engage it in spite of the risks.
So, you know, I came up with this term in that article. You and I recently wrote a chapter for Critical Handbook that's coming on critical pedagogy. And I am playing, as we sort of bring this conversation to an end too, is I'm playing with what if we had a concept just like indigenizing at the paralleling of fearlessnessizing everything, just like indigenizing, because fearlessnessizing is drawing from traditions, ways of knowing prior to the point of departure.
There's an advantage to that, right? There's like in my book on patient communication, I wasn't allowed to use the word hypnosis because of of these controversies.
I remember that, yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, the only risk with not using the word indigenous is that we don't continue to support indigenous sovereignty and do decolonizing. But in terms of getting more people into the conversation without risking one of those slippery slopes, I like that idea, because you get to the same place in a way. You really
That's what I'm doing. Yeah, just expand the frame, right, of what we can bring to it, what we can hold. And then with this notion of an aesthetics of beauty, but beauty in the largest relational sense. Again, not classical Western Enlightenment notions of beauty. And this brings the connectedness so that we come into fear and fearlessness, confronting not, fear, who wants to talk about fear? Well, what if we were to make that a really beautiful topic?
Exactly. And not make it just relevant to the great fears, but the small fears, and that we could even just call the chronic stressors that are facing us, right? Because when I say fear, I'm thinking of anything that inhibits our positive potential. And so, it doesn't have to be the big fear. And then also to say that there are good parts of the fight or flight mechanism of fear that we should be glad that we have. So I think we could easily frame it in a more positive way.
We've got lots we could go on. This has been great. I want to just give a moment of silence as we come to close this up, and so each of us can just maybe share something with each other, and not necessarily thinking about teaching others, right? Not necessarily being that pedagogue, but actually just in relating to each other in what we've just exchanged. So let's just give a moment of silence, and then just speak as you wish. I feel like I'm traveling on a sailboat with you. The seas started off very calm, and as we proceeded, up came the waves. Up came even the rebel rogue waves. And at times the wind was so strong we were hanging on the sides of the gunwales, our bodies even hanging off the boat. And in this, quote, threatening, dangerous condition, we kept looking at each other and reminding through some kind of telepathic communication, this is beautiful.
Wow. And that was so well expressed, Michael. I don't want to even come close to saying anything, but I've experienced that and I've seen that beauty, and I thank you. I thank you for this conversation.
Thank you very much. I'll send you a copy.
All right.
Bye-bye.